So imagine this. What if the next administration walks in on day one? Not just with ideas, but with a fully formed plan. A plan to basically dismantle the federal bureaucracy as we know it and rebuild it based on a very specific conservative vision. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take stacks of dense material policy papers, reports, articles, and boil them down into the key insights for you. Today, we're unpacking some major transition plans from leading conservative groups. It's really a detailed blueprint for a potential government overhaul.
Yeah, and this isn't just, wishful thinking on paper. It's presented as a very tactical agenda. They actually look back for precedent, citing the 1981 Mandate for Leadership.
Ah, the Reagan-era one.
Exactly. They point out that over 60% of its recommendations apparently became policy within Reagan's first year. So there's a sense that this kind of planning can have real impact, and quickly. And the context they paint is pretty stark. The documents framed today as an era of division and danger, comparing it to the late 1970s. They argue the country's on edge.
What are the specific worries they highlight?
Well, domestically, they point to things like inflation, saying it's ravaging family budgets, ongoing drug overdose deaths, and a deep concern about what they call cultural elites pushing the Great Awakening.
That term again?
Yes. And there's a specific focus on children, warning about the, quote, toxic normalization of transgenderism in schools. So very strong language on the cultural front.
And looking outward.
Outward, the focus is squarely on China. It's defined explicitly as a totalitarian communist dictatorship. And they say it's waging a strategic, cultural, and economic Cold War against the U.S.
So high stakes both at home and abroad, according to these plans.
Definitely. And given all that, the stated mission is urgent to, and I'm quoting here, save our country from the brink of disaster. They talk about rescuing kids, reclaiming culture, reviving the economy. The whole point of these detailed plans is readiness to be staffed, organized, and ready for immediate action on day one.
Okay, quite an ambition. Let's unpack that. We should probably start with how they actually plan to get control over the massive federal workforce, right? Then maybe look at defense and borders, and then wrap up with the domestic policy shifts, family, education, that sort of thing. So, first hurdle, the bureaucracy itself. The sources argue today's federal workforce, this sprawling bureaucracy, often acts independently, maybe even against the president's agenda, the deep state idea, essentially. How do these plans propose actually getting a handle on that?
Right. The core problem, as they see it, is the permanent nature of the civil service. Sometimes they even describe it as weaponized. So the strategy to counter that really boils down to one phrase. Personnel is policy.
Meaning
The absolute first priority is speed and staffing, getting political appointees people aligned with the new agenda into the top and middle ranking positions as fast as humanly possible.
why the emphasis on speed?
Well, they explicitly say it's a lesson learned from the last Republican administration. They point out that administration was slower than any recent presidency in getting its political appointees in place.
And the consequence was?
The consequence, they argue, was that departments had to rely on career staff, sometimes holdovers, who might have fundamentally disagreed with the new policies. It created a vacuum, basically.
Okay, so fill the top spots quickly to enforce the commander's intent, as they say. But that's just the leadership layer, a few thousand people. What about the hundreds of thousands of career employees already there? How do they plan to reform that system?
Well, that involves going deeper structurally. Targeting the government's central HR agency, the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. The criticism here is twofold. The current system is, they say, too expensive and not truly based on merit.
Let's take the cost first.
Financially, the claim is that federal compensation is out of whack. They cite figures suggesting that federal employees, once you factor in benefits, make about 17% more on average than private sector workers.
Wow. And the cost of that difference?
They put a number on it. Around $36.5 billion extra per year for taxpayers. That's the figure in the source material.
That is a staggering number.
Right.
So what's the proposed fix for pay?
It's basically two things. Get rid of automatic, across-the-board annual raises, and shift completely to a pay-for-performance or merit-based system.
And the merit part, is there more to it than just pay?
Oh, yes. This is maybe the most fundamental change proposed. They argue the whole hiring system is flawed.
How so?
They claim that for over 3 decades since the late 70s, actually the government hasn't been able to properly distinguish between good and, well, unqualified applicants. They blame the abolishment of a general intelligence test called the PACE exam back then.
So the argument is that merit got diluted.
Pretty much. That the system became more about just checking boxes than finding the best people. So the reform aims to bring back rigorous, objective hiring based on actual knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSAs, to get the best talent, period.
Okay, so it's a multi-pronged strategy. Loyalist appointees up top, efficiency drives, and a revamp of the core merit system for hiring and pay. The goal seems to be making the bureaucracy responsive. How does this commander's intent idea play out in national security, then? Let's shift to the Pentagon, DoD.
Well, the shift there is described as immediate and, frankly, quite aggressive. The global landscape is painted as hostile, with China as the #1 threat.
We heard that earlier, the totalitarian communist dictatorship language.
Exactly, engaged in this Cold War. So the proposed military strategy isn't about matching China plane for plane or ship for ship. It's called a cost-imposing strategic response.
Cost-imposing, meaning?
Basically adopting a denial defense, focusing capabilities on making it prohibitively difficult for China to achieve its goals, particularly regarding Taiwan or threatening allies like the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, deny them success rather than try to outspend or outbuild them everywhere.
Interesting. What about the state of the U.S. military itself? Is there concern there?
Yes, significant concern. The sources criticize the DoD, which, remember, spends around $850 billion a year for focusing too much on what they term leftist politics instead of pure military readiness.
Do they offer evidence for that claim?
They point to recruitment numbers as a key indicator. For instance, the Army missing its 2022 recruitment goal by 25%. That's 15,000 soldiers short.
That's a big shortfall.
It is. So the reforms aim squarely at reversing declines in readiness, force size, the age of equipment, and also what they describe as a risk-averse culture. They specifically mention things like the COVID vaccine mandates as an example of misplaced priorities.
Okay, so focus on China abroad and readiness and recruitment at home. That naturally leads to border security, which is framed as a domestic national security issue in these plans. What's the immediate action plan for the border, which they call a lawless humanitarian crisis?
The goal stated is, very clearly, to end the crisis attributed to open borders. And they want to do it through aggressive enforcement, backing specific pieces of legislation they want ready to go.
Like what?
Well, things like the Finish the Wall Act. Pretty self-explanatory, completing paused construction projects. Also, reinstating migrant protection protocols via the Remain in Mexico Act. That requires asylum seekers to wait outside the U.S.
And asylum itself.
They want to tighten that, too, through the Closing Asylum Loopholes Act. The idea is to raise the standard for making a credible fear claim, which they argue would reduce fraud in the system. It's all geared towards deterring illegal entry and immediately asserting control, according to the sources.
All right, let's pivot to domestic policy now.
Yeah.
Health and human services, agriculture, education. The theme seems to be about restoring the family as the central unit, pushing back against government influence.
That's definitely the connecting thread, yes. The plans explicitly aim to limit what they call the left-wing social engineering agenda, basically across the board in domestic agencies, recentering policy on family and state-level authority.
Okay, education first. What's the plan for advancing education freedom?
It starts with an interesting observation. They point out that the federal government's actual funding for K-12 is pretty small, under 10%, maybe 7% in FY 2022.
Right. Most funding is state and local.
Exactly. But they argue the federal regulatory impact is huge and excessive. So the most extreme proposal is just eliminating the Federal Department of Education altogether.
Wow. Okay. Short of that.
Short of that, the focus is on empowering parents through portability, making federal education dollars follow the student to whatever school the family chooses, public, private, charter, you name it.
Okay. And what about Title IX? That's become such a flashpoint, hasn't it? The rules about gender equality in schools.
Huge flashpoint. And these plans take a very clear stance. A top priority is restoring what they see as the original intent, focusing on due process and the rights of biological women and girls.
So rejecting newer interpretations.
Explicitly. The documents state there's no scientific or legal basis for redefining sex to include sexual orientation and gender identity under Title IX. They also specifically warn against schools facilitating social gender transitions for kids without parental consent.
Why that specific warning?
They argue it increases the chance that children will then seek medical interventions like puberty blockers, the long-term effects of which, they claim, are unknown and potentially harmful.
Okay, let's shift to the safety net. Things like food stamps, SNIP, and WIC often run through the Department of Agriculture. What's the thinking on fiscal reform there?
The keywords are fiscal responsibility and targeting benefits only to the genuinely needy, while pushing back hard against what they see as mission creep.
Any specific targets?
A big one is a recent increase in SNIP benefits. There was an update to the Thirsty Food Plan calculation.
Right, that determines benefit levels.
Exactly. And that update led to, they say, a unilateral 23% increase in benefits. These plans want to roll that back, arguing that single administrative change will cost taxpayers an extra $250 to $300 billion over 10 years.
That's a lot of money. Anything else on food programs?
Yes. They also target something called the Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP, in school meals.
What's that?
It lets schools in low-income areas give free meals to all students without checking individual family incomes. The argument in these sources is that CEP now ends up feeding kids from middle and even upper-income families, turning it, in their view, from an anti-poverty tool into a sort of universal free lunch program funded by the feds.
Got it. Okay, last big area, Health and Human Services, HHS,
Right.
especially the agencies like the CDC that were so central during the pandemic.
And the language here gets incredibly sharp. The CDC is called, and this is a direct quote, perhaps the most incompetent and arrogant agency in the federal government, based on its COVID response.
Wow, strong words. So what are the proposed reforms?
They talk about ending the perceived incestuous relationship between the NIH, CDC, and vaccine makers, closing the revolving door where people move between government and industry.
And culturally?
They also demand an immediate stop to what the department is apparently doing in terms of, quote, woke transgender activism and junk gender science. So a real pushback on both procedural and cultural fronts within HHS.
So putting it all together, what does this mean for you, the listener? It seems these documents aren't just a wish list. They lay out a really detailed, actionable challenge to how Washington currently works. A plan for a pretty radical shift, ready for day one.
Yeah, if you connect the dots, it's a comprehensive government-wide strategy. It's about reasserting presidential control over the executive branch, getting loyalists in place quickly, and streamlining regulations. They even mention specifically rolling back recent rules on environmental reviews, NEPA, to speed up things like highway and pipeline projects.
So removing perceived obstacles.
Exactly. Removing bureaucratic obstacles, confronting foreign adversaries like China head-on, and fundamentally shifting domestic spending and regulation away from what they call ideological mission creep. The goal is to push power back towards what they define as constitutional conservatism, focusing on the individual, the family, the states, and fiscal limits.
It certainly raises a fascinating final question, doesn't it? If a new administration actually tried to implement all these sweeping changes, overhauling civil service hiring, rolling back benefit increases, ending vaccine mandates, reorienting defense, and did it quickly as planned, how soon would people outside of Washington, in their everyday lives actually feel the impact of such a dramatic shift, both here at home and maybe even globally? That's definitely something to chew on.